Good morning. I'm John Ravitz, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for the Business Council of Westchester. On behalf of our President and CEO, Dr. Marcia Gordon, our Board Chair, James Schutzer, and the Chair of our Government Action Council, George Lentz, I want to welcome everyone to our Fall Political Leadership Series. This program cannot happen without the support of our sponsors, and we want to thank Burke Rehabilitation Hospital, Empire City Casino by MGM Resorts, Levitt First Insurance, Vail Industries, and White Plains Hospital. We created the Political Leadership Series a few years ago to be able to give our members and the Westchester business community the opportunity to not only hear from political leaders on all levels of government, but to make sure that their voices are heard as well, dealing with issues that really affect every sector of the economy. And we've been fortunate enough to have Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer, Governor Hochul, Congressman Jamal Bowman, the Speaker of the Assembly, the Majority Leader of the State Senate, and we're very fortunate enough today to have the newest member of the Westchester Congressional Delegation, Congressman Mike Lawler. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest before we turn it over to the Congressman. Congressman Lawler proudly represents New York's 17th Congressional District, which includes Rockland County, Putnam County, and portions of Westchester and Dutchess County. Prior to serving in the U.S. House of Representatives, the Congressman represented the New York's 97th District in the State Assembly, where he served on the Committee on Aging, Banks, Education, Housing, and the ranking member on Governmental Ops. In the State Assembly, he passed more bills than any other member of his conference, a testament to his bipartisan, pragmatic approach to government. And in just one term, he was able to successfully pass legislation, including additional funding for law enforcement and first responders, tax relief for middle-class families, and historic funding increases for our schools in the Hudson Valley. He's had a long history of public service, and prior to being elected to the Assembly, he served as the Deputy Town Supervisor in Orangetown and was a senior advisor to the Westchester County Executive. In Congress, he serves on the House Financial Service Committee and on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and he also serves on nearly 50 congressional caucuses, including as co-chair of the Anti-Congestion Tax Caucus, the Appalachian National Scenic Trails Caucus, the Moldavia Caucus, and he also serves on the Bipartisan SALT Caucus and the Problem Solvers Caucus, which we will be talking about and their role of what's happening in DC during the course of this program. He is a lifelong resident of the Hudson Valley, growing up in Rockland County, and he and his family live in Pearl River. Congressman, thank you for joining us today. For those of you who are participating, if you do have questions and we do have time, please put those questions in the Q&A box. We are also sending this program out live via our Facebook page, and this recording of this program will be on our business resource page on our website later today. But Congressman, again, thank you for joining us. I have to say, when I first got elected to the New York State Assembly, my first 6 months, my biggest challenge was finding my way from my hotel to the Capitol, to the Legislative Office building, and beginning to learn the legislative process. You've probably had one of the most chaotic, busiest, intense first terms that any member of Congress could be part of. And obviously, as everyone knows, we are in a critical point in this country. We are 5 days away from a possible government shutdown. And I know the role that you are trying to play is critical to what could happen over these next 5 days. So we're going to turn this program over to you for a few minutes to give us the most updated information that you can share with us, being on the front lines, and also talk about some of your priorities, your first term in office, and how it affects the business sector in Westchester County and the rest of the state.
Well, appreciate it, John, and thank you to you and Marcia and the team at the Business Council of Westchester for affording me the opportunity to speak with your members this morning. You know, it's a great privilege to serve and to represent Westchester, as well as Rockland, Putnam, and parts of Dutchess County in Congress. And certainly, having worked in Westchester County under Rob Astorino, you know, it's near and dear to my heart, and certainly want to see Westchester continue to grow and thrive. And so the work that you all do in partnership with the businesses in Westchester to make that a strong economy is critically important. Obviously, we are just a few days away from a potential shutdown. My objective is to avoid that at all costs. I don't think it is productive. I don't think it will actually serve a purpose, certainly not one that is reflective of the American people. And I think it will be destructive. There is no question that we need to cut spending. Under Joe Biden, spending increased by over $5 trillion in 2 years. Yes, some of the programs we can all point to and say we like this or we like that. But the reality is that that is unsustainable. We have now passed $33 trillion in debt. Both parties have contributed greatly to that over time. But we are at a point that this is wholly unsustainable. And if we don't start to make significant changes with the way we operate as a federal government and as a state government here in New York, I think we are on the precipice of an economic collapse. So working through the appropriations process is critical. We need to go through single subject spending bills. The House Republican majority agreed to that in our rules earlier this year. We all believe in the importance in reining in spending, and not just discretionary spending, but we're going to have to look at mandatory spending long term as well, which is about 70% of the budget, and the biggest driver of our national debt. But my colleagues, about 7 of them, led by Matt Gaetz, have taken this opportunity to try and grind the place to a halt and undermine the speaker for personal reasons. And I think it is destructive. And I don't think, frankly, it's what the American people sent us here to do. They sent a House Republican majority delivered by New York to serve as a check and balance on the Biden administration and on the spending in particular. I have looked at this as an opportunity to be a leader, to stand up for what's right for not only my district, but the country. And as John mentioned, I am a member of Problem Solvers. We have been meeting. There's 32 Republicans, 32 Democrats. We came up with a bipartisan framework that would keep the government funded through January 11th. It would deal with supplemental funding for Ukraine. It would deal with disaster relief, as well as implement Remain in Mexico into statute through December 31st, 2024, as a policy to help deal with the crisis at the border. House Republicans would like to get a CR passed. Ideally, we would be able to move one and negotiate with the Senate Democrats on their proposed CR. But in the absence of passing a more conservative CR through the House, it's critical that we have a bipartisan one move. I don't believe that shutting down the government is going to be an effective tool. And I think it will, in fact, weaken our hand when it comes to reining in spending long term through the appropriations process. Unlike the shutdown that occurred under President Trump, where the president and the Senate were controlled by Republicans and they tried to make the shutdown as painless as possible, I think this administration, like the Obama administration before, when House Republicans were in charge, would try to make it as painful as possible. And the reason I say that is the blame would be on Republicans, and they would try to exert as much pressure as possible to get Republicans to agree to open the government back up. And so, that is where I think my colleagues that are pushing for this are playing with fire, and it's going to backfire significantly. So that is, we're back in Washington today. I just flew out of White Plains this morning, and we're going to be meeting throughout the next 24, 48 hours to try and come to some agreement on a CR that we can get through. And if not, myself and a number of my colleagues are going to do what we have to do to get where we need to be. In terms of priorities for me and the work that we're doing in this Congress, as John mentioned, I serve on financial services and foreign affairs. A number of those, the work that we're doing in both of those committees is substantive and important, frankly, to our economy. When we're talking about, capital markets or housing, or data privacy or digital assets or ESG. Those are issues that we are focused on that are critically important within the financial services industry. And on foreign affairs, I've done a lot of work with respect to China and the Indo-Pacific, Israel and the Middle East, a lot of focus on Ukraine and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I've been focused on issues pertaining to Northern Ireland and Haiti. Here in the Hudson Valley, we have one of the largest Haitian diaspora in my district. And so a lot of challenges in Haiti, and we continue to focus on issues that are impactful there. But the big issues that I think nationally require a lot of attention and focus are energy, immigration, China, our spending and tax code, housing, congestion pricing is a major issue for us locally, along with salt, as well as the continued issues surrounding crime and public safety, and the fentanyl crisis that is impacting so many of our communities. And that is where I've tried to focus a lot of my effort and energy through the first 9 months of this Congress. On energy, earlier this year, we passed H.R. 1, which would increase domestic production of energy. I am all for renewables. I don't have a problem with renewables. I support them. I support the goal of getting to a net zero carbon emission standard. But we have to be realistic about how we're going to get there. And I think when Andrew Cuomo shut down Indian Point and didn't really have a plan to replace the energy supply, he put New York on a very bad path forward. Tom DiNapoli just came out with a report a little over a month ago that shows that New York is nowhere near meeting the goals of the CLCPA, and that we have a real challenge with our energy supply going forward. I think it is, frankly, across this country, a major challenge. China and India and other countries around the world are not adhering anywhere remotely close to the environmental standards that we implement in this country. But I think the fact that we are now once again in a position where we're reliant on foreign governments and entities like OPEC for oil and gas is foolish. And I think it has a tremendous impact on our economy, a tremendous impact on the cost of goods and the cost of living. And so I think we need to have a more comprehensive energy plan that is holistic, that is based on fact and science and reality, and not just the hopes and aspirations that are really not necessarily rooted in where we are today. And so that's something that I think Congress has to play a pivotal role in. I think we need to focus on significant permitting reform around the country. I also think nuclear has to be part of the solution here. So this is something where I think energy is going to have to be a big focus of Congress and the next administration going forward, and really try to address America's energy independence long term. Immigration, obviously, we are dealing with a significant crisis in New York, but across the country. Since Joe Biden took office, nearly 6 million migrants have crossed our southern border, many of them illegally, and there's no end in sight. Just the other day, 11,000 migrants in one day. This is totally unsustainable. New York City and New York State are feeling the crunch. New York City has taken in over 100,000 migrants, and they can't handle it. Quite frankly, their policies have helped invite this type of, explosion of migrants coming to New York. Sanctuary city policies, right to shelter, refusal to cooperate with law enforcement and ICE, using taxpayer funds for free housing, healthcare, education, food. People obviously are desperate and they need support. And so when you have a state like New York and a city like New York that has these policies in place, people are going to come here. And so I don't know why anybody is surprised by that. But it's clear that it is unsustainable in New York. Eric Adams is saying it will destroy New York City. They're talking about $12 billion over 3 years to pay for this. So I think we need to have a serious discussion and come to a realization that doing what we're doing on immigration is not working. We have to secure the border. We need to increase border personnel. We need to increase court personnel to hear these asylum cases expeditiously. And we need to address the fact that there's at minimum 11.5 million. I think it's frankly over 20 at this point, but at last count, 11.5 million undocumented immigrants in this country. We're not rounding them up and kicking them all out. So we have to be realistic about how to deal with that. Many people came here, they overstayed visas. You have children who came here through no fault of their own and have been part of our communities. So we have to address DACA. But we have to address immigration long term. We have to have a pathway to legalization for these folks that are living in the shadows. For some people, that will ultimately mean citizenship. For others, it won't. And for some, it will mean deportation. But we have to actually have a plan to deal with this. And thirdly, we have to deal with the legal immigration system. As I've said before, my wife is an immigrant. I've gone through this process. It's a fundamentally broken system. My office deals with immigration cases every day of people who are struggling through the process. We need a more merit-based system, frankly. When looking at our economy, we have shortages in doctors, nurses, engineers, home health aides, in addition to restaurant workers and ag workers and hotel workers. But we should be looking at how to fill the needs of our economy writ large and use immigration as a vehicle to do that. I think most people in the business community, certainly when I talk to the U.S. Chamber, that is a big focal point for them, how we address the immigration challenge long term and address the shortages in our workforce. So that is something that I think fundamentally, three-pronged we have to deal with. China is a major challenge. They are our greatest geopolitical foe. It's why Speaker McCarthy set up a select committee on China to address the competition between the Chinese Communist Party and the United States. I don't think we can go to war with China. I don't think we can be in a trade war with China. But I do think we need to be firm and resolute and smart in dealing with China. You look at, for instance, Taiwan. 60% of international trade comes through the Strait of Taiwan. You look at the world's advanced manufacturing for semiconductors, 90% of them are made on Taiwan. So it is critically important for the United States that there not be a blockade in the Strait of Taiwan or that there not be an invasion. And I think we need to obviously do everything we can to deter China from doing that. But I think when we look at advanced manufacturing and American companies that are doing business in China, they need to be held accountable. They need to understand the real challenges that we're dealing with. I think you look at, for instance, pharmaceuticals. Most of the precursors are made in China. We need to bring manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, precursors back to the United States. A lot of it used to be made in Puerto Rico. We need to be smart about this. You look at semiconductors. Obviously, the CHIPS Act is critical. It's critical for the Hudson Valley. IBM is located in Armonk. We have onsemi in Hopewell Junction. There's smaller firms throughout Westchester and the Hudson Valley. In addition, obviously, the pharmaceutical industry with Regeneron and Pfizer's vaccine research facility over in Pearl River. So there's a lot that I think we need to do with respect to China from an economic standpoint, from a business standpoint, that is critically important. I touched on it a bit with spending and taxes. The reality is we cannot continue down this path of spending $33 trillion in debt. When I was in high school, not even 20 years ago, our national debt was under 10 trillion. Both parties have contributed to this. There's a lot of reasons for it, but $33 trillion and counting with no end in sight, it's not serious. And I think we have to get serious about dealing with this. Both parties. It's going to require to really look at short-term spending as well as long-term spending, and really tackle it in a bipartisan way. Otherwise, in dealing with Social Security or Medicare, making sure that both programs are fully funded and sustainable for the long term is not going to get done. It's going to require both parties to do it. On a tax level, obviously, there's certain aspects of the Tax Cuts and Job Act that have expired, especially R&D tax credits. The rest of the tax code is set to expire in 2025. So that discussion going forward is going to be critically important. For the Hudson Valley, obviously the cap on salt is important. The first bill I introduced would lift the cap on salt from $10,000 to $20,000 for married couples. I also introduced a bill along with Mikey Sherrill, a Democrat from New Jersey, that would lift the cap from $10,000 to $100,000 for single filers and $200,000 for married filers. My colleagues and I from New York, New Jersey, California, in particular, have bandied together to basically say to leadership that we will not support any tax bill that doesn't include a fix on salt. I'm more than happy to negotiate, to come to some sort of compromise on this, but doing nothing is not acceptable for my constituents, 50% of whom used to itemize their deductions prior to the change. Now it's about 19% in the district. But given where we are, in New York and the high tax state that we live in, and we can get into New York spending, which needs to be totally reined in. They've increased spending by over $50 billion in 3 years. It is a long-term challenge, but our folks shouldn't be double taxed and shouldn't be penalized because they live in a high tax state by the federal government. So that's something that we will continue to work on as well. Congestion pricing, I've been vocally opposed to this from the start. Along with Josh Gottheimer, a Democrat from New Jersey, the co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. We've introduced legislation going after congestion pricing, and certainly we'll continue to push back. I met with Janno Lieber a few weeks ago, made the case to him about, number one, why congestion pricing is wrong, but number two, frankly, the lack of investment in the Hudson Valley. Metro North is certainly better than west of Hudson, but west of Hudson is a disaster. There's no one-seat ride. Express rail service has been limited for years, and there's really no plan to improve the service. And in Rockland County in particular, we pay $50 million more in taxes to the MTA than services we receive. That's totally unacceptable. We're the only county in the MTA region that has a value gap. And so, as I said to Janno, I want to see an actual plan and what they are proposing to do to improve rail service west of Hudson and on the Metro North lines to help our residents. But I continue to be extremely opposed to any plan that would implement a tax on commuters. Our folks are basically the piggy bank for the MTA, and it's been that way for a very long time. And I just don't accept that as the vehicle by which they need to make up revenue. I'll give you a case in point. They're talking about raising $1 billion from congestion pricing. They lose $500 million every year on people who don't pay the fare to ride the subway. So let's start there. If we're looking at revenue shortfalls, let's start by actually enforcing the fare on those who actually use the MTA system. So that would be, in my opinion, a very good place to start when you're talking about the funding. Two last issues I'll touch on quick, and then happy to open it up to questions. Crime, I think, continues to be a major challenge across the country. A lot of this obviously controlled at the state and local level, but there are things that Congress can do. And earlier this year, we did, when Washington, D.C. tried to change the law and lessen the penalties on criminal conduct. And much like New York, really try to, frankly, not hold people accountable for their conduct. We passed legislation through the House that the Senate under Chuck Schumer and the White House said that they would oppose. But ultimately, they've reversed course and the Senate passed it and the White House signed it into law, reversing the decisions that were made by the DC City Council over the objection of the mayor. And they overrode the mayor, and that's how it became law. But it, basically kept in place the penalties for, a whole host of offenses and ensure that people are being held accountable for their conduct. There's no question, we low-level nonviolent offenders shouldn't be rotting away in jail. People who have substance, use disorder, we want to get them treatment. But those who are engaged in violent crimes, those who are found to be dealing fentanyl-laced, products, they need to be held accountable. And I think this is a big challenge that we continue to see across the country and in major cities. And we want to continue to tackle that, incentivize states like New York to implement a dangerousness standard and to allow judges the discretion they need to do their jobs. The last thing I want to touch on is housing. The housing crisis across the country is real. We're talking about over 6 million units underbuilt in the United States. Obviously, our population continues to grow. We are not building units at the rate and speed that we need to. Here in New York City has real challenges, some of it of their own making. I think, their rent control laws have been a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of creating vacancy issues. There's 50,000 vacant units, most of them tied to the fact that these landlords will not be able to recoup what they invest to bring these apartments up to code. And so that is something that I think needs to be dealt with, certainly in New York. But I am working with the Housing Committee to come up with a real housing plan and how we use the federal government to help incentivize states and localities while respecting local control of zoning. I think what the governor tried to do earlier this year was wrong. I was opposed to it. I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach to housing works. And certainly what works in New York City does not work in the Hudson Valley. And I think the governor should be more cognizant of not doing a one-size-fits-all approach or mandating certain things, but trying to work with localities to incentivize development. And I think that's something that, obviously the power of the purse is always helpful. Whether you're talking about trying to build infrastructure, you're talking about trying to, build more housing to get there. So those are just some issues. Happy to open it up to questions. and really appreciate everybody hopping on and giving me the opportunity to talk with all of you.
Thank you very much, Congressman. You've given us a lot to talk about. I want to get to it, and I know I'm sensitive to your time too, as well. But let's go back to the shutdown issue, because obviously that is front and center. And we don't want to get too insider baseball, but can you explain to folks who might not know what CRs are, what that means, and the procedures that would have to take place over the next few days to implement those?
Yeah, in Washington, D.C. lingo, a CR is a continuing resolution, which would basically be a short-term spending measure to keep the government funded while we go through the appropriations process. Basically the way Washington has operated for the last 30 years is to pass one big omnibus spending package, throw everything in, and it's an up or down vote, yay or nay. And obviously when you throw a lot of things in, it makes it hard for people to vote no on certain things that may matter to their district, et cetera. And that's the way Washington has operated for a very long time. We're trying to break that and to get back into the appropriate way to do the budget, which is to do the 12 individual appropriations bills one by one and force an up or down vote on each. And you've even seen change in the Senate. Chuck Schumer is doing individual appropriations bills because that's what Kevin McCarthy said we're doing in the House, and we're not going to take an omnibus. And so, we're starting to change that. But I think some of my colleagues are, they want all the change all at once. And if it's not happening fast enough, they want to grind it to a halt. And I just think it's illogical, and I don't think it really serves the purpose that they're hoping it does. And I think we really need to continue that work while keeping the government funded short term so that the American people are not impacted by it.
One of the things that I find so fascinating and alarming as we observe all this is you're used to the partisan back and forth, Democrats, Republicans, Republicans, Democrats. What you're facing right now is within your own conference. And one of the things that I feel you have done in a very important way is in a respectful, professional way to call out those members who basically, as you said, just want to shut the place down. And I'm just curious in terms of how you feel their constituents, do they really understand the ramifications of whether it be Congressman Gates or other members of that small group of people are trying to do over these next few days that could have a major negative impact in their communities?
So I think for some of these people, quite frankly, they don't care. Their districts are very right or very left, one way or the other. There's only about 35 congressional districts in the entire country that are competitive today, mine being one of them. About a decade ago, it was about 70. So, we've seen obviously greater polarization within the country writ large, but these congressional districts have also gotten way more polarized. And so, it makes it difficult to find people who are willing to buck their party or the base when it comes to certain issues. And to me, whether it was the debt ceiling negotiation or whether it was, the potential of a shutdown, I'm not playing politics with the economy or people's lives. And I think, there's a time and a way to fight these battles. But when you're in a divided government, as we are, and House Republicans are in the majority and Senate Democrats are in the majority and the president is a Democrat, you have to realize that you have to negotiate and you have to find compromise and you have to be willing to give a little to get the bigger picture. And, as President Reagan famously talked about, 80%. If you can get 80% of what you want, it's pretty good. And I think that's where, unfortunately today, we have folks in both parties who want 100% of what they want. or they're going to throw a temper tantrum. I mean, before this morning, I read a tweet from my Westchester colleague Jamal Bowman, bashing Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin and telling them to resign. We have to be able, even within our own parties, we have to be able to find compromise within your own conference, and that's my point. To my caucus, when I called it a clown show last week, it's a handful of people who refuse to compromise within, let alone with Democrats.
Well, we're going to need to continue to have your voice of reason, because it's imperative that the work get done, and it's not going to get done as you described it if a handful of people for their own reasons are doing that. So continue to do that as well. You mentioned a whole host of issues that I want to get to. On the energy front, today it's announced that a group of business organizations around the state, Business Council of Westchester included, are really continuing to do what we at the BCW have been doing for the last few years, which is to have honest conversations on how we get to the ultimate goal of a carbon-free emission. We've always said that we support the goals of the CLCPA, but the dates that have been put in place are just not going to happen. We haven't built that renewable infrastructure that we're going to need. What role do you think you can continue to play and have in those conversations? But more importantly, how do we get communities who don't even want battery storage farms or solar farm applications passed through their local boards to move forward so we can build that infrastructure?
Well, I think, frankly, some of the renewable energy industry is finding out how difficult it is, with the permitting and siting and local control of zoning and how that impacts some of these projects. But it's also why I think this is, frankly, a more national issue than, frankly, a state one. You're talking about interstate commerce. You're talking about a national energy grid and how that impacts the entirety of the country and the economy. You have states that are purchasing energy from neighboring states because they're not, based on the policies they've implemented, they're not creating enough energy for the grid. Look, I think New York has been wrong on this. I absolutely support the effort to get to renewable energy. I think we should increase solar, wind, tidal. But the idea that you're going to cut off natural gas at this moment is foolish. You need dispatchable energy when the sun sets or the wind stops blowing. And the reality is 60% of New Yorkers rely on natural gas. 70% of electricity is generated by natural gas. So if you're going to turn off the spigot, somebody's going to have to explain to me how you create enough electricity to meet the demand. And nobody has been able to honestly explain that. Yep. And I think, frankly, the utility companies and the natural gas industry, they've done a horrible job of pushing back on some of this and explaining it to the public. The average homeowner who has, gas-powered appliances and gas to heat their home, it's going to cost them upwards of $30,000 to retrofit their home over time. Who's paying for that? I mean, you have a senior living on a fixed income. Who's paying for that? And I think this is a real challenge across the board. The idea that we're going to ban all new natural gas hookups is foolish. The reason natural gas has reduced carbon emissions 60% greater than renewables over the last 2 decades is because natural gas helped us move away from coal, and it is cleaner. And so we have to be realistic about this. We have to be making decisions based on where technology is today, not where we hope it will be, but where it actually is. And this needs to be done kind of dual track. I just don't think that the goals that have been set and the time frame that has been set is realistic at all.
Well, and again, we'll continue to urge stakeholders to have those honest conversations so we can deal with the reliability issues, the cost issues. If we're going to continue to recruit and retain businesses in New York, We need to be able to prove to them that we have a grid that will not collapse. And so that will be our mantra as we move forward. A few more questions that have come up, and if you don't mind, I'll get to them fairly quickly. You mentioned R&D. We at the Business Council of Westchester 2 years ago created a program called the Westchester Innovation Network, in which we've been able to bring innovators from all over the country and the globe to Westchester County to put their products and test them with Westchester businesses. But as you mentioned, the R&D funding line might be cut off. What are you doing to try to, as you said, to try to expand that, and your thoughts on if that can go through?
I would like to see it go through. I think it was an important component of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and was very helpful to businesses across this country. But as I said before in talking about SALT, I think something needs to be done on SALT, and I've just been very clear. I'm not going to support any tax bill that does anything to extend any provisions that doesn't include a short-term fix for SALT, so that when we get to 2025 and everything needs to be, re-upped and renegotiated, that we can do that. But look, I think it's important for businesses. I think it was a really good vehicle to help incentivize and invest. But it's part of the conversation that's going on that I think will resume in earnest once we get through the appropriations process here.
Another question from the banking sector. The question regarding your views on the Durbin-Marshall Credit Compensation Act, which is in the House right now. Large and small banks, as well as credit unions and all major U.S. airlines, are opposed to the legislation because it would raise prices for consumers, eliminate credit card reward programs, and increase fraud and cyber risk in the payment system. You have a perspective on the bill?
I'm opposed to it. I think, and I've met with a lot of the banks on this particular issue and the credit card companies. Look, I mean, these are choices that the American consumer ultimately will have to make. I think most people enjoy their rewards programs that they've been getting. Obviously, it's a big reason why people have increased their use of credit cards and other means to get these bonus points as a way to pay for travel or vacations. If this were to go through, those programs would basically be done. So it's a choice that I think ultimately the American people will weigh in on. But as it stands, as that bill is written, I'm opposed to it.
Okay. As you know, many of our members, small businesses, they make up such an important piece of our economy. And a few questions have come in. If there's anything that Congress can do to reduce the burden of over-regulation on businesses. And let me make sure I get the whole question on businesses that, again, more mandates put on their shoulders.
Look, one of the things that we're doing through financial services is really going after the regulatory agencies, the SEC in particular, Gary Gensler, and what they are doing, both just from a regulatory perspective within the financial services industry, but also with respect to ESG and how that has impacted the bottom line for businesses all across this country. And I think these regulatory agencies serve a purpose, an important purpose, but I think many of them have gone well outside their mandate, and certainly in this administration have sought to use their authority to go after the financial services industry for sure, but the regulatory burden across the board, especially on issues pertaining to energy and the environment, have had a big impact on businesses across the country and certainly in New York. I think also, obviously, you see, the challenges that it has with respect to manufacturing. And, we're seeing obviously a push to bring, for instance, chips back and semiconductors. I think we have to look at how we actually incentivize businesses to operate here as opposed to not. And so, we should be looking, for instance, with respect to pharmaceuticals, how do we bring the precursors back to the United States? How do we focus on manufacturing, pharmaceuticals here in a much larger scale? I think you can go industry by industry or business by business. You can look at solar panels, for instance, and getting the rare earth minerals. If we want to build and be a leader in building renewable energy, we should be looking at what we need to do with respect to rare earth minerals, and do more within the United States so that we're not reliant on other countries, including China. And so that's something that I think a lot of the focus to me, oftentimes from the regulatory regime and from certain administrations is how to make it more difficult for business. We should regulate. Yes, we should have rules in place, but we should be working collaboratively to grow the economy, to create jobs, and to ensure that from a supply chain standpoint, from a trade standpoint, from a currency standpoint, that we are doing everything to strengthen the United States and our allies as opposed to our adversaries.
Just one or two more questions, then we'll let you go, Congressman. You did touch on the drug epidemic that no community is immune to right now. And a question that came in stated that according to the data from the New York's Office of Addiction Services, the opioid overdose death rate has more than quadrupled in the last decade. And in 2022, 5,413 New Yorkers died due to opium-related overdoses, roughly one death for every 2 hours. The question really is, again, what can Congress do to take a more active role in combating this massive problem that, as I said, no community is immune to anymore?
Look, I think this is one of the biggest issues that is impacting the country. We had over 100,000 opioid deaths in 2022, 70,000 of them roughly related to fentanyl. Fentanyl is poison. And I think we need to obviously focus on a few aspects here. We need to focus on treatment. We need to focus on recovery. We need to focus on education. And we need to focus on enforcement. And from an enforcement standpoint, I think a few things. Number one, we need to go after China with respect to the precursors of fentanyl and what they are doing, transporting that to Mexico. Number two, we need to be going after the cartels and what they are doing to manufacture and traffic fentanyl across our southern border and into our communities. If the Mexican government is not willing to take on the cartels, we need to use economic leverage through the U.S. Mexico-Canada trade agreement and exert it on them. This is a real calamity and one that I think obviously too many families are being impacted by. I've held multiple roundtables so far this year on specifically opioids and fentanyl overdoses and substance use disorder. We're going to be having more. I've introduced legislation, for instance, that would allow federal prosecutors the ability to charge anyone who traffics fentanyl, laced drugs or fentanyl with attempted murder, because that's what it is. You're trying, in my view, if you are trafficking fentanyl, your intent is to kill, because it is straight up poison, and anyone who is engaged in that should be held accountable. Obviously, we have a substance use crisis in this country. There's a demand for these drugs that we have to tackle, and we have to make sure that people have access to treatment both for substance use disorder and mental health, which oftentimes is coupled together with substance use disorder.
The Business Council, even before the pandemic, we were very engaged in trying to get the business community more involved in understanding that childcare is such an important piece of recruiting and retaining their employees. And it's something that their employees have to deal with on a daily basis. Can you give us a little understanding of where we are with the Child Care Stabilization Act? Obviously, the funds are pretty much empty right now, but do you see a push in Congress to move that along? And do you sense that people are beginning to understand that when we talk about employers and employees, that childcare has to be a piece of that?
Look, I don't think there's any question, with more folks in the workforce, childcare has become a bigger and bigger issue. And it's not like it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago. And family members could be helpful, or one parent was home. Times have changed. And I think childcare is a critical component of ensuring that our workforce and that our economy is as robust as it can be. And I think, this is an issue that comes up across the spectrum. I think the investments in childcare have been welcomed by most Americans. I think it has been beneficial and helpful to most Americans and to our economy. So I have co-sponsored legislation to expand the child care tax credit to allow for more investment. Obviously, when we're talking about child care, we're also talking about Head Start. You're talking about pre-K. All of this is critically important, and it helps parents stay in the workforce and really not have to worry about their child's well-being, knowing that either someone that they trust or a program is available. And so I think we need to be looking at how we continue to fund that. I think it's certainly a priority for me and many of my colleagues, and we'll continue to push on that.
Thank you. Congressman Mike Lawler, thank you for joining us today. I know these next few days are going to be intense, and it's critical to have someone like you who understands that you need to have a responsible, reasonable voice in the halls of the Capitol, reaching out to party members from both sides of the aisle to get things done. So we look forward to hearing more about the leadership role that you're playing over not just these next few days, but moving forward. And please know that if we can be of assistance to you and your staff and your constituents, the Business Council of Westchester is there to help. But thank you for joining us today. Again, we want to thank our sponsors, the Burke Rehabilitation Hospital, Empire City Casino by MGM Resorts, Levitt First Insurance, Thale Industries, and White Plains Hospitals. This recording of the Congressman's program will be on our website later today. So for folks who had to tune in late or those who had to leave early, please come back and listen to it, because again, the Congressman touched on key issues that are going to be so critical to not just the Westchester business community and New York State, but the nation. So Congressman, thank you, good luck, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Marcia. Appreciate it, everyone.
Have a good day, everybody.